This is the Horse Radio Network.
You're listening to The Stall and Stable Show, ideas for happy horsekeeping.
This was going to be an episode about boosting your clinic revenue. But after Monday's appointment with my veterinary specialist, this episode is about the Great Misunderstanding. It all starts with horses who don't cooperate. If you have a horse who's difficult to handle, has a buck that just won't go away, shies at some unseen boogeyman in the arena, or has a poor work ethic, this is the episode for you. So listen in. This is episode 96 of the Stall and Stable Show. I'm pleased to welcome our new title sponsor, American Stalls, a new experience in horse stall equipment. With over 25 years' experience in the steel industry and clients in 41 U.S. states, American Stalls brings a quality of service to horse owners that makes stable design enjoyable. American Stalls began building horse stalls in 2006, when Hits Horse Shows hired them to build 1,500 stalls for their show location in Saugerties, New York. The success of that project quickly led to a word-of-mouth referral stream that now includes thousands of both commercial and residential horse barns. Their mission is simple in principle, but one that can only be seen through with a deep commitment to the highest quality service, to build the most elegant, safe, and durable barn products in the equestrian industry. I am so pleased to welcome them as our title sponsor. To learn more, visit them online at americanstalls.com. Welcome back, listeners. As you know, sometimes I mix things up a bit on the podcast, and Stall and Stable is, for the most part, about creating happy and healthy environments for our horses, but sometimes that goes beyond the four walls of the barn. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit and tell my story, and if you know it already, then bear with me, or fast forward to the new stuff. I got Susie back in 2019. She was in a really bad way when I got her, and I knew little of owning thoroughbreds and nothing of owning a mare. Because the pandemic kept Susie and I quite isolated from trainers, vets, and other practitioners at the time, I had to do a lot of research and discovery on my own. The few horse professionals I did enlist to help me with Sue all had advice that I thought was trustworthy, and I tried to put their advice to work, despite the fact that my gut was very clearly telling me something else was needed. But because this was new territory for me, my confidence was kind of poor. Since I'm nothing if not committed to understanding the inner workings of animals, I left no stone unturned in trying to figure out why Susie, who's agreeable in so many other ways, was such a challenge under saddle in certain circumstances. After running through the diagnostic goose chase of what's wrong with my mare today, I realized something that really opened my eyes to the plight of riding horses of all kinds. There are a lot of things wrong with our horses. A lot. This is because we keep them in most unnatural environments, with unnatural feed matter and routines, and we subject them to extraordinary stresses every day, often without realizing it. From training strategies that rely on punishment, to having human expectations of an animal that does not and cannot think or reason like a human being. Think about it. We've taken a prey animal, put it in a box, feed it what and when is convenient for us, and then begin a physical fitness regimen, but fail to take into account that the horse's body must be adequately nourished, cared for, and managed, especially when we've removed pretty much everything a horse needs to be healthy, including environments that are counterproductive to their mental health. Horses are animals. That seems obvious on the surface, right? But I think we get so involved with what we're doing with them that we forget that key fact. Their bodies and their minds are different than our human ones, but we treat them like humans and expect them to behave like humans. And when they don't, we call them jerks. We say they're ornery, dumb, or have a bad work ethic. We rarely ask ourselves why a horse behaves in a certain way. Whether that's behavior we observe while our horses are turned out in a pasture, a paddock, on the trailer, on cross ties. They do a lot of things that we don't understand. And the time is now, right now, for every single horse owner and professional to make asking why their number one priority when training horses. Why? My newest horse, a 5-year-old off-track thoroughbred mare named Clarabelle, was adopted from Horse and Hound Rescue in Oklahoma. Some of you may know the story of how Clarabelle came to arrive at Who Hollow, but if you don't, just go up to stallandstable.com and type in Clarabelle into the search engine and her story will come up. Clarabelle has been with me since the middle of December 2021. Today's March 21st, right? 2022. This very, very sweet little mare was born in Kentucky, sold to a small but upscale racing operation, and traveled to several different tracks to race a total of 11 times. She was retired responsibly from racing and found herself at Horse and Hound, looking for a new start. Jamie Jennings, my friend and colleague from Horses in the Morning, who takes on many of the Horse and Hound thoroughbreds, knows a good brain when she sees one. And Clarabelle had arrived at Jamie's barn, and Jamie said, "Yep, Helena, this horse, she's a good one. And I think she'd be a good fit for you." But what does it mean exactly to have a good brain? How does one define good when it comes to a horse brain? What do we really want from our horses? What is reasonable to expect of them? Because they'll do pretty much whatever we ask them to do. The trouble is, there are too many trainers who don't ask. They demand. And they demand because they don't know how to ask a horse to cooperate. And that's what a good brain is, isn't it? A brain that cooperates with what we humans want from the animal. We want our horses to cooperate. We ask them to do something. We would really like for them to do that thing. That's cooperation. And a horse who's well-behaved or has heart, these are the horses that cooperate. Not that what we want is bad. Not at all. It's totally fine to want to ride, jump, pee off, drive, and play with our horses. But too many of us get wrapped up in our own horse lives and our goals that we forget the tools we use to achieve our goals are living, breathing, feeling creatures. They're prey animals. And when they behave like prey animals, instead of like humans, we get frustrated, angry, sad, depressed. Why? Because of our expectations. Because we expect horses to live up to a certain standard of human performance, physical and mental. And in many cases, horses get pretty darn close to what we expect, to what we want. But in far more cases, a horse who's in pain or confused instead gets further confused and put in further pain. Trainers who smack a horse in the head with an open hand because the horse pinned his ears at another horse who got too close. Or a horse who bucks after an oxer and gets whacked for it. Or the jockey who excessively uses the whip to gain a length. We put horses in pain every single day because of what we don't or refuse to understand. I think it's important to note here that most of us don't realize we're doing this, and we don't intend to do it, and we don't want to do it. But we do. And in many cases, it's just what we've learned. Years and years of horse training have evolved, or we've evolved. Our training methods have evolved over time because the more we learn, the better we can do by our horses. And so as we learn, as we gain insights into how they work, we adjust our training strategies. We adjust the tools that we use. We adjust their tack. We adjust their food. We're learning and we are adapting so that we can keep our horses more comfortable. So I'm going to back up to Susie for a minute. When I first got Susie, again, she was in a bad way, and I made it a priority to heal her body and get her to a place where she wasn't just surviving or existing, but where she was fit and healthy enough where she can now become an athlete. And when you sit on a horse's back and you ask them to carry you around, even if you just ask them to sit there or stand there while you sit on their back, that takes both physical and mental effort from them. Then, we ask them to walk, we ask them to trot, canter, jump. Now they become true physical athletes. And we have to make sure that their bodies are conditioned and fit for what we're asking them to do. So back to Susie. She would bolt or buck into the right lead canter. We had a great time walking, trotting. She had some behaviors under saddle that were hard to pin down. While we're riding, no matter what surface we were on, she'd be anxious about the canter depart long before I ever asked her for the upward transition. 3 different trainers told me she just had a bad work ethic, or she was confused. One actually said it was simply because she was a mare. Another told me she was taking advantage of me because I was too timid. But I wasn't timid. I was afraid, yes, but I was afraid I was causing my horse harm. I was listening to her, and she was telling me that she wanted to try, but something else was going on inside of her that made it really difficult for her to meet my expectations. Here's where we go down that diagnostic goose chase. Why was it worth it to me to do this? Because Susie was really, really good for 1, 2, 3 rides. And then she'd kind of fall apart. So I kept turning over stones to figure out what's wrong with my mare, right? What's wrong with my horse today? We finally discovered an old stifle injury that fully explained Susie's particular challenge. She wasn't naughty. She didn't have a bad work ethic. She was in pain. In fact, if you're going to layer on that very human phrase, work ethic, to a horse, I'd say that Susie actually had a great work ethic because she continued to try for me even though she was in pain. When Sue would grind her teeth as the saddle comes out, she wasn't being ornery or the B word, as one vet actually called her. She was telling me that her knee hurt or that her stomach hurt. She does tend to be a hypervigilant and anxious mare. Is that because she's been in pain for so long? Or is that part of her disposition? I do think she's, in general, more prone to anxiety than other horses, say Clarabelle and Brody, for example. So that might make her prone to ulcers. The point is, behaviors in Susie that others had interpreted as naughty or as choices were not choices at all. They were expressions of pain. Now let's move on to off-track thoroughbred number 2, Clarabelle. Since Clarabelle arrived at the beginning of winter in New England, I made peace with the fact that she'll likely sit around for a few months. And after the trials I went through with Susie and the ridiculous amount of research I did to try to understand her better, I figured that Clarabelle may have some post-track issues to resolve. A few months off with good food, a calm environment, and some friends isn't a bad way to start one's transition. Clarabelle is every bit as sweet as Jamie said she was, and then some. Her temperament is different than Susie's and Brody's. Very different. Nothing really seemed to faze her when she arrived. She stepped off the truck after a 24-hour trip. Thank God I put her in a box stall, by the way. But she stepped off that truck, and she was just amazing. That doesn't mean she's a deadbeat. She was, and is, appropriately reactive to new things, but curious and self-assured in a way that Susie is not. There is really nothing Clarabelle refused to do. even things that were brand new to her. I mean, it's easy to tell when she experiences something novel. Like most green horses, she looks at it wide-eyed. She tries to figure out what this new thing is. And that could be a strange object that appears in her paddock or a training question from me. She loves people, not in the Susie way, which is like all up in your kitchen. I call Susie Mrs. Kravitz because she's nosy and, wants to know what you're doing, comes over to you, gets all in your space, likes to be scratched and massaged and doted on. But Clarabelle is a little different. She likes to be in your space, but she'll stand quietly, calmly, politely. She'll sniff you, and then she'll just relax by your side. I think she feels comfortable around people. And she's a pretty calm horse, so when I go out to work with her, I'm calm. Clarabelle is definitely more laid back in her behaviors. So it was kind of surprising when this horse, who's pretty much willing to do anything, showed an aversion to being brushed. And I take my time. I know that Jamie worked with her for a couple of weeks while she was in Oklahoma, but you never know what a horse has experienced. So I started from scratch. And I used the clicker to teach her basic things like leading with a lead rope, leading at liberty, standing tied, picking her feet, all sorts of things, taking treats by hand. I mean, this horse had no idea what an apple or a peppermint was. And she had to learn how to take treats gently. So all of these things that we're doing, she's just so agreeable, except for being brushed. Now, what did she do? What were her behaviors? She very, very subtly flicked her tail. Not a big swish like Susie does, just a subtle swish. And then when I touched her, she would lean away from my touch. She didn't pin her ears, she didn't grind her teeth, nothing else. When I went to massage her, she leaned further away. Most of these horses, when you get that spot, right, you scratch them under the neck or you massage them on the top of their neck, or I use some of the Masterson method techniques. She was not interested. So, in the past, I could hear some trainers saying, oh, she just doesn't like to be touched. It's just her thing. She doesn't like to be groomed. Right? And then people just accept that. Clarabelle doesn't like. Clarabelle doesn't like what? Clarabelle doesn't like to be groomed. Is that the same way Clarabelle doesn't like apples? Because she doesn't know anything about grooming? No. She's a track horse. She's been brushed plenty of times. She's been handled. She's been poked. She's been prodded. Okay, so we keep our eye on that. She's great for having her feet picked. You put a saddle pad on her, put a saddle on. No problem. Girth her up. Little swish of the tail. And I always do my girth up one hole at a time, so I'm really cautious. You go to put the bridle on, she starts to get nervous. Yep, she's fine on the cross ties, but when you go to take that halter off and put the bridle on, she'd pass manure nervously. Like the first couple of times you're teaching a horse to get on the trailer. They pass manure when they're nervous. I thought, okay, maybe she doesn't have a lot of experience on cross ties. So I took her out and I tied her to the fence. Thought, let's tack up out here. Same thing. She's fine with the saddle, girth. You take the halter off, and she throws her head up in the air nervously. You finally get her to settle. You put the bridle on, and she's looking to get out of town. Now, not in a real crazy way, just wants to walk away. And if you're not on guard, if you're not paying attention, she will just walk away with a mission. Like, I'm out of here. Not running, not bolting, not biting or doing anything else crazy. Just, I'd like to leave now. I'm going to go. I'm just going to walk over here. So you start to think, all right, maybe her teeth hurt. I haven't had the dentist out here yet, but maybe it's her teeth. Maybe the bridle doesn't fit. Maybe the bit is pinching. Now, mind you, I've ridden her probably 4 times, maybe 5 times since she arrived in December. And that was just to make sure she was safe and had a good whoa button. And to try tack on and see how she would respond to being ridden at Hoo Hollow. Basic stuff. Mounting, getting on, getting off. What does she like? What does she not like? What does she know? So I'm thinking her riding experience, her undersaddle experience with me, there's not enough of it there for her to be afraid of it or for something to be that wrong that she'd get nervous when we tack up. But, you check all your things. Mostly, when horses have a problem, it's something that we're doing. So I took a look at what I was doing, how I was handling her, the energy that I had in myself when I would go out to the barn to work with her. And nothing is clicking. I took a video and I talked to Jamie. I said, hey, Jamie, you have way more experience at this than I do. What do you think? Clarabelle she's got this thing with the bridle and she's touchy. Like she's sensitive when you touch her skin. If you touch her neck or you touch her barrel or her bum, even her face. So Jamie suggested that maybe she has a vitamin E deficiency. Horses, especially Kentucky bred or ex-racing horses, sometimes they get turned out in a field on pasture, and that pasture is great. It's got lots of vitamin E in it. But then they go to their new homes, and now they're on a diet of hay, especially in the Northeast, especially in New England, where we do have vitamin E deficiencies in our forage. Let's do some blood work to check her vitamin E levels. At the same time, I thought, this horse is agreeable in so many other ways. Her personality, this aversion and the behaviors with the bridling and being brushed, not wanting to be brushed or touched or massaged or even scratched under the neck, right? We know every horse likes to be scratched under the neck or in their mane. Clarabelle was just not interested. Now, before I go on about what I did at this point, we're going to take a quick break to hear from Tangent Materials, makers of Tangent Fencing. If you're tired of rotting broken fences, it's time to talk to Tangent. If you want perimeter fencing that's safe and durable with a classic style, it's time to talk to Tangent. If you want to spend more time with your horses and less time worrying about your farm, it's time to talk to Tangent Materials, makers of premium HDPE lumber that looks just like wood, but without the worry. To learn more, go to stallandstable.com/fencing. The contrast between what Clarabelle was averse to and just how willing and sweet she was in everything else said, this has got to be something physical. And so I started to put things together. Number 1, the contrast in behaviors. Sweet, but sensitive to touch. She's an ex-racing thoroughbred. She had 11 starts, but that meant she lived the track life. Getting fed twice a day, probably high amounts of high sugar feed, the stress of training, and the fact that research shows us that anywhere from 65 to 95% of performance horses, racehorses in particular, have ulcers. Okay, so there's a high likelihood she just came off the track with them. My experience with Susie, who is also very girthy and sensitive to touch when she had stomach issues, ulcers, and hindgut issues. It's my responsibility to find out where this pain is coming from. Or I don't want to say that. It's my responsibility to understand why Clarabelle had these behaviors. And scoping her was pretty much the way for me to find out, or at least rule out, that it was something in her stomach. I really didn't expect to find anything in there because these signs, even the issue with bridling, were so subtle. And, honestly, I rode her just a couple of days ago in the big ring and was like, okay, this horse is so great. I'm going to start putting her to work. Now, we're just legging up, so we're walking, but we were doing stuff. I asked for a little contact. We were trying to do a circle. I was looking for a little rhythm at the walk. I experimented with half halts. She did it all, and my God, she was just so willing. Even stuff that I know she did not understand, she made such an effort to figure it out. So when Dr. Kate came with the gastroscope, neither of us thought that we were going to find anything significant. And if we did find an ulcer in there, we figured, well, she's been here a couple of months. I even treated her casually when she got here for ulcers. We didn't think we'd find anything. We were both very surprised to find large, deep squamous ulcers in her stomach. And a lot of them. In addition, we found the most disgusting, huge clump of botfly larvae. Which is interesting because I found bot eggs on her legs and behind her elbows when she first got here. Now, I don't have a lot of experience with bots because we're up in the Northeast and we just don't get them a lot here. I got myself a bot knife and I started to research them and do my best to get rid of them from her hair. And then I hit her with Quest, a dose of ivermectin. I found 1 or 2 larvae that came out in her manure, and I figured, all right, great, it's working. Well, I don't know how many bots she had in her gut, because the size of this clump that was still in there, even after deworming, is crazy. It's gross, and it makes me so angry. But that's part of having horses. They have bugs in their guts. But the whole point of this is that this poor girl has really bad ulcers, but her behavior would not tell us that. The other thing that helped me to decide to have her scoped was that she wasn't putting on weight as much as I wanted. She had a great appetite, would eat anything you put in front of her. First cut, second cut, pellets, doesn't matter. She'd eat it. Except for apples and peppermints. She had no idea what those were. And she's ravenous. She just eats and eats and eats all day long. When Brody and Susie are taking their mid-morning nap, Clarabelle's eating. And when you call her to dinner, doesn't matter where she is in the property, or if it's 5 o'clock, she comes trotting right up into the barn, goes into her stall, and stands so politely at her bucket, waiting for dinner. So good appetite, easy keeper, not really gaining weight. And then there's her manure, which, for my liking, had a little too much undigested fiber in it. And I know that when Susie's tummy is upset, when she's having some ulcer issues or she's got too much acid in her stomach, I can tell by her manure. And as soon as I start her on a course of sucralfate, which is her management tool, Susie's management tool, her manure changes. Those undigested fibers go away and the manure returns to those nice formed balls. Clarabelle's, who's on the same diet as Susie, just her manure was too loose. It was too undigested. So all of those factors went into my deciding to have her scoped. But here's the message that I want to get out to everybody, is that too often I don't know what the word is, we layer on top of horses the ability to reason like humans. So we just brush off behaviors as something that horses are choosing. We use phrases like, they know better. They know their job. Or he's just in a mood. Or she's ornery because she's a mare. Or maybe she's in heat, which could be a valid reason. But it's not just that she's in heat. It's that her body feels a certain way or is uncomfortable when she's in heat. Or when she has ulcers. Or when she has arthritis. Or a bone chip. Or the pony who bucks after a jump. But not every jump. No, that's just something the horse does. He's trying to get his rider off. Really? Why doesn't he try it after every jump? Why doesn't he try it all the time? Why doesn't he try it with every rider? Why only sometimes? And I say this all the time. The more our technology evolves to give us better insights to our horses' bodies and brains, the more we can understand their behaviors. But we can only do that if we're willing to let go of our tendency to anthropomorphize. We're not dressing our horses up in clothing like some people do with their little dogs, right? On the surface, we don't believe that they're humans or that they have the same level of knowledge or intellect that humans do. But we very much inadvertently expect them to understand things in human ways and to perform. And when they don't meet our expectations, we label that in very human terms. And unfortunately, that means horses who are expressing pain or pain behaviors will get punished, or we put them to work, or we work them harder until they figure out that expressing pain behaviors only makes the pain worse. And so we teach them to shut down. We teach them learned helplessness. And it's not just physical pain. Remember that horses are social animals. When they're in emotional or social distress, they're going to exhibit challenging behaviors as well. If we bring this conversation back to our expectations of our horses, when our horses don't cooperate by exhibiting these challenging behaviors, as their handlers, we feel things. We feel angry, frustrated, sad, depressed. So my request of you, listeners, is to start to rethink horse behavior. What do you really know about the way a horse's brain works? That white bucket on the grass that's been there for the last 5 days, and the horse shies at it every time. Is the horse being naughty because they shied at it on Wednesday and not on Monday? Or could it be that on Wednesday, that bucket happened to go through a horse's optical blind spot? And as you passed it, perhaps 6 inches closer than you did a few days before, it popped out of that optical blind spot and startled them momentarily. What do you know about how a horse sees? What do you know about how a horse suppresses their flight instincts in order to accommodate our requests? And if you don't know a whole lot about that, I think it's your responsibility and my responsibility to learn about it. And at the very least, rethink your strategy of punishing a horse when they don't cooperate. Think about what cooperation means. Think about what a good brain in a horse means. The more you think about it, the more light bulbs will go off in your head. And the more answers to your horse's behaviors and questions will appear. And I know it's expensive to have your horse scoped. I know it's expensive to have your horse x-rayed. But horses are expensive. Are you going to spend $400 to enter a sanctioned event, or are you going to spend $400 to have your horse scoped? I think that for the privilege of sitting on their backs and asking them to work for our pleasure requires a level of commitment to their comfort that a couple $100 is worth. And it's not like you have to scope every time, but to get a baseline of what your horse's stomach looks like and then match that up with the behaviors you're looking at that point in time, that's a good baseline. That'll help you determine whether they're being uncooperative or in pain or confused or whatever it is going forward. We owe it to our horses to understand them better. And the more we understand them, the more comfortable we can make them. And the more comfortable we can make them, the longer our partnerships with them can be. There are far too many horses who end up in long-suffering homes or on slaughter trucks because they're misunderstood. So again, my plea to you is to take some time this week and think about what you can do to learn more about why your horse is shying, bucking, swishing her tail, rearing, or standing alone in a corner. Pick up a book. Listen to another podcast. There are a network of trainers and horse professionals out there whose number one priority when they're working with horses is Why? Why does my horse do this? Does she like it? Does she hate it? Is she indifferent to it? Is she confused? Is she uneducated? Or is she in pain? So if you have a problem, reach out to someone who puts the horse first. Don't be satisfied with what you've been taught all along. And don't be satisfied with strategies that force a horse to do something or demand a horse do something. I would argue that pretty much every horse is willing to cooperate. Every horse will give us what we ask of them. But we have to understand how to ask. Otherwise, we're destined to a lifetime with these horses of misunderstanding. So with Clarabelle, I'm trying a new treatment. Well, it's not new. It's omeprazole, but I'm going to try the injectable. And we're going to give that about 4 weeks. I'm also going to put her on sucralfate because those lesions are pretty horrible. I'm going to hit her with another dose of ivermectin. Hopefully we can get rid of those spot larvae. And she's going to have some time off. We're going to let her just chill. We will rescope her in a month to make sure that our treatment works. And I will take very careful note of how her behavior changes throughout her treatment. So thank you for joining me in this solo conversation. For links to resources that informed this conversation and my opinion, go to stallandstable.com, episode 96 show notes, and I will link you to research material, articles, trainers, and a bunch of other stuff. Again, go to stallandstable.com, episode 96, show notes for links for more information. And thank you to our title sponsor, American Stalls. You can find more about them at americanstalls.com. And our thanks also to Tangent Materials. And that's going to be a wrap for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it.